Gary Chapman is the retired chairman, president, and CEO of LIN TV. During his 17.5 years at LIN, Gary experienced 1 hostile takeover, 2 IPOs, mergers and acquisitions going from 7 stations to 31, 6 capital structures, and 3 name changes. Well, that's what we call really earning your stripes in this business. And there's something else that keeps Gary in the hearts and minds of many in the broadcasting sector of our business. You see, Gary Chapman was the joint chairman of the NAB when must-carry and retransmission consent was passed. No matter what part of the business you're from, we all understand the difference that having the quintessential person at the helm at the right point in time can make. Gary was just that person for the broadcasting community. LABF has the great privilege of having him serve as board member, and because of that, Gary was very hesitant to accept. But they closely observed his technique as an avid fisherman and slowly reeled in this giant catch of 2017 to make sure he would not get away. Gary, thanks for being one of broadcasting's greatest friends. Please join me in applauding Gary Chapman.
First of all, to follow I Dream of Jeannie. Wow, what a treat. Let me do first one thing, and that was, with my hat as a board member, thank the University of Maryland, the NAB, IRTS, and BEA. By our expansion with our relationships with them, we have been able to better serve the broadcast industry. We're grateful for your partnership, and thank you. I want to share with you 3 stories. The first story has to do with retransmission, must-carry retransmission. In 8 days, we are going to celebrate, us in the television industry, the 25th anniversary of S12, Senate Bill S12, which brought us must-carry and retransmission. I remember the day well. As joint chairman, I was in the U.S. Senate gallery the day it passed, watching American democracy at work. That night, NAB President Eddie Fritz sent out a memo to all the membership. First line of that memo said, "Today was a defining day for the American broadcaster." Eddie was right, because every cent of retransmission revenue began right there. Without that today, the television industry could lose 40–50% of its asset value. It saved the television industry. One of the things I can remember most about this was the amount of time that went in prior to that anniversary of 25 years ago, October 5, 1992, and when must-carry and retransmission was really born. It was January 1991. It was at the television board meeting, Naples, Florida. You see, the television industry was divided. The network affiliates, which we were one, NBC, CBS, ABC, wanted retransmission, but the independent television stations, well, they wanted must-carry. So we were a very divided industry at that time. We also knew that they had their own representation in Washington. If they didn't get must-carry, they were going to split off from the NAB and lobby Congress for must-carry. We also were told that we could have one, but not both, must-carry or retransmission. It was a dilemma. It was the longest television board history ever. At noon, it spilled out onto the beaches. The next morning, we gave the marching orders to Eddie Fritz, the president, Jim May, government relations. Go forth, get both, do the impossible. Little did we know that a year and 9 months later, the broadcast industry would achieve one of the largest legislative victories of any industry in modern time, October 5th, 1992. That was a banner day for us. Last night we had a gathering of some of the people that are here today. Jim May from the NAB, Jack Goodman, NAB. Eddie Fritz could not make it. From Lynn, Paul Karpowitz, Greg Schmidt, Lee Speakerman. They were all part of this at the time. We had this gathering together and celebrated. Lyle Banks was with us too last night. Also with us was Marty Franks, CBS, another important part of making this happen. The people that I just introduced you to were part of that united industry that we had. When I left the conference room in Naples, Florida, I can remember thinking, this is a real uphill fight. But we had one thing. We were a united industry. We were a focused industry. We were in lockstep, and we were energized. And this is what made the day for the broadcaster in getting retransmission and must-carry. Those people I just introduced you to, they were a large part of the foundation on which that united industry was built. Story number 2 had to be with how the National Association of Broadcasters Educational Foundation and the BLT, Broadcast Leadership Training, came to be. In the mid-late 1990s, many of us, part of the NAB, realized that as an industry, we had 3 issues that we need to deal with. The first one is we need to have a marquee event in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the accomplishments and service of local radio and television, service to America, local news, public affairs, community service. Second, we needed to have a better training program for tomorrow's leaders. And lastly, as an industry, we needed to be more inclusive of women and minorities. In 1999, we had our first service to America, largely to the thanks of Bruce Reese and Bonneville. Today, Bonneville, Hubbard, Hearst carry on that tradition. That same year, I can remember Chuck Sherman, head of the television department of the NAB, coming to Providence and having dinner with Paul Karpowitz and me and asking for $500,000. We talked about it. The donation would be to start the NABEF and the BLT. Paul and I decided to make that contribution. We could have had naming opportunities at the new NAB building, but chose not to do that. The early sponsors at that time were Marty Franks of CBS, John Kinemikes Hearst, Ron Townsend, Gannett, and Liz Burns of Morgan Murphy. Now, our reward was not bricks and mortars. Our reward were the graduates, the people. 289 graduates in the last 17 years, 49 of which either own or have owned local radio and television stations, 9 NAB board members, and being part of the legacy of seeing our industry, local radio and television, become more inclusive of women and minorities. As I look around today, this room at the Gotham, I see many other opportunities for people to make contributions. One of the things that I was lucky enough to do is to document what I told you about with retransmission, must carry, and it is part now, you can go into the program, of a case study that I produced with the help of the friends that I just mentioned. You can go on and read the entire story. It's 66 pages. It also includes an 11-minute video, some of the very first television commercials ever produced on retransmission, and why broadcasters should be compensated. Thanks to the University of Maryland with helping us in that endeavor. So, I see other case studies as I look around this room. Or maybe you'd like to do an oral history to capture your interest. You could maybe teach a BLT class. Take an afternoon and do that. Or maybe you could make a contribution to a student or a teacher. Or maybe design your own program like Carol Cooper, Richard Lieberman of our board again. It's up to you, but you can make those contributions. And indeed, it is good to give back to the industry that's been so good to us. I'd like to thank a few people who have helped me along the way. First, the board member that was with me for all 17 and a half years, hostile takeovers, 2 IPOs, 6 capital structures. Thank you, Wilma Jordan. Gary Ganaway, Highway to Heaven, to World Now. A few stops at Johns Hopkins along the way. Thank you. Banker, media analyst extraordinaire, Drew Marcus. We rang the bell together. Thank you for the IPO and for all the kind words that you've had along the way. Now I'd like to thank somebody else who's not here. He was chairman of the board of Lynn Television 1990 to 1994. Came to Lynn through a hostile takeover from the cellular telephone industry. He had a background in another business. It would be cable television. Remember, this was through must carry and retransmission. But my chairman told me, Gary, you've got to do what's best for your company and for your industry, Lynn Television Broadcasters. Thank you, Craig McCaw. He let me do what I could do. So there's one other person I want to thank, and Karen Chapman, thank you. God willing, we saved the best for last. I got a closing story. It's very short. It was July 1996. The Children's Television Act had just been passed. There was a big conference at the White House at that time. I was invited because we partnered with Disney and PBS to produce Bill Nye the Science Guy. It was President Clinton and Mrs. Clinton were there, Vice President Mrs. Gore were there, head of the networks, head of the Hollywood studios, FCC. It was one of those meetings where everything that needed to be said was said, but not everybody said it. It went on for a while. And then towards the end, somebody said the most memorable, the most important thing that was said all day. That was Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. He reminded us how important the day was that day. And then he said, I would like you to think of all the people that helped you get here today. They may be very near, they may be next to you. They may be very far, they may be in heaven. I would like you to think of them for 30 seconds. I gotta watch, I'll keep the time. Time's up. Now I'd like you to do one more thing, and that's to think how happy you have just made them by just thinking of them. Thank you, and Godspeed.